What makes Lord Henry seem so reliable to Dorian, and why does Dorian believe what he's saying?
I think he's older than him and had a great influence on him. I feel like he was an important part of that society, and so Dorian, he was well respected in the society, so I think Dorian was easily influenced by him.
Why?
Go ahead.
Why does Lord Henry feel that Dorian's beauty is so important?
Lord Henry, I feel like, is a very shallow person. He focused on arts and, going to the opera and going out with people. He really didn't want to find the deeper meaning in life. So I think Dorian was just like a pretty object to him in many ways.
So would you say he wasn't very interested in more academics and intelligence?
Lord Henry wasn't interested in academics or intelligence? I don't think so.
And do you think part of that had to do with how young Dorian was, that Dorian wasn't interested in academics either, and that's what made them so compatible?
I think Dorian was very young and he was naive and easily influenced, so I think when Lord Henry explained how he felt about things, Dorian just felt that must be true. He didn't really know any better.
Mm-hmm. How did Dorian's outlook on beauty and life change throughout the story?
I think when the story started out, I don't think he placed very much importance on that, but as time went on, more and more value was placed on that and less value on himself as a good person on the inside.
And
he relied just on the outside.
Would you credit most of that to Lord Henry?
Yes, I would.
Did Dorian's great beauty develop a good person or a rude and self-centered one, and why?
The beginning of the book, it seemed like he was developing into a very kind person, but he chose to follow the path that Lord Henry set out for him, and I think his beauty became all-consuming to him, and he really became ugly inside as time went on.
Mm-hmm. I also believe that he no longer cared what other people thought. He only cared about his own beauty and what Lord Henry had to say about it. Such as when Basil tried to talk to him about what rumors were being spread in the city about Dorian, and then he eventually murdered Basil because he was so upset with him and annoyed with him, even though it was just such a little silly thing that strained from his beauty and selfishness.
Well, right, because he, instead of listening to what Basil came to him to let him know what was being said to try and help him. Well, no, Basil came to him and was trying to help him by letting him know, what was being said. And yes, Dorian didn't really care what anybody said about him and became angry with Basil for even coming to him with that. And yes, in the end, his ugliness inside is really what led him to kill Basil, who at one time was considered a very good friend.
Mm-hmm. Would you say that Basil or Lord Henry was more influential on Dorian, and why?
Well, I think obviously Lord Henry, because he followed that path of beauty being all important and shallow thinking to be more important than any deep thoughts or intelligence or academics, that those didn't matter. He found Lord Basil sometimes kind of strange and annoying, and I don't think really enjoyed spending time with him.
Since you believe that Lord Henry had a greater influence on Dorian, do you believe that Basil had the potential, though, in the beginning of the story to influence Dorian in a great way, if Dorian decided to actually listen to him?
Yes, I do. I think Basil was more level-headed and more focused on the inside of Dorian, which is what probably came out in the picture more than the outside. I think he cared a great deal about Dorian as a person, and wanted him to develop into a nice young man. I believe Dorian would have turned out a lot different had he not met Lord Henry and followed that path.
Mm-hmm.
In the beginning of the book, he seems very kind and gentle and not really so aware of his beauty, I thought.
Mm-hmm. Today we consider selfish people rude and bad. However, Lord Henry says that unselfish people are boring. Why do you think Lord Henry thinks people with bad qualities are more interesting?
That's a good question. I wondered that throughout the whole book, because he did seem to think, yes, that rude and selfish people were more important than kind people. I don't know. He felt that shallow people had a lot more depth than people that were not so shallow.
Do you think it was because they were more outgoing and more would say what they really thought no matter who it hurt? Do you think that's why he thought they were more important?
Well, I think it was more intriguing than somebody who's kind and gentle, more, maybe that type of person seemed more interesting to him than someone that was just, honest, kind person. He just seemed to not really live his life in reality. He seemed to just focus on shallow, unimportant things. Does that make sense?
Yes. I also said that maybe that even if the person was ugly on the inside but beautiful on the outside, it would just overall give them an advantage in life. And would you say that's also why he was more intrigued, because the beauty just drew more people to that person?
Yes, I mean, that's why he liked Dorian to begin with, is he just saw the outside and he didn't seem to really care about the inside. I think it was what was on the outside, somebody looked beautiful on the outside, that was important, or he gave them more importance that way than maybe someone who was more homely.
Mm-hmm.
Go ahead.
How did Dorian's actions change after he realized that everything he did reflected on the painting?
How did his actions change? Well, he hid the painting away so nobody could see it, locked it in the room. He didn't want anybody to see. It's like he locked it up away in the room because he didn't want anybody to see the true him.
That he was ashamed of the ugliness that it was, and that it was truly him. And he didn't want
that
people
was
to
him,
know.
and the ugliness on the inside showed on the painting, so then people would know.
So I know we kind of touched on this, but did Dorian really love Sybil Vane or not, and why?
I think it's kind of a hard question to answer, because there again, I think had Lord Henry responded favorably to her when they went to see her,
Mm-hmm.
I think Dorian would have married her and loved her. He thought he did.
Maybe that he had the potential to love her, and that maybe if they had gotten married, he would have grown to love her.
Maybe, and I think maybe he did love her a little bit, but Lord Henry's influence over him was greater than his love for her.
So you would say that Lord Henry's influence overshadowed a lot of what Dorian thought throughout the book as well?
I think so. I think because he became involved, the friendship started when he was so young that he was really able to mold him and to greatly influence his
ideas and behavior. Yeah, his ideas and behavior.
Yeah.
Would you say there was another reason for Dorian to hide the portrait, and if so, why? Aside from the fact that it was so ugly. It wasn't reality that people were seeing. It wasn't true and kind of the topic of how they weren't really touched in on reality.
Well,
I
yeah,
think that's a common theme throughout the book.
it is. Yes, I think they just looked at Dorian's beautiful face and didn't see what was inside, and the painting showed what was on the inside, and he didn't want people to see that. But yes, they all throughout the book, it was nothing was real. You know, everything that everybody did was artificial and shallow.
Mm-hmm.
And it's that time period too, is how they thought about things.
Mm-hmm.